La séance, bienvenue à la...
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 22 of the Standing Senate Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by committee on Thursday, December 11th, 2025, the committee commences its study of supporting, diversifying, and modernizing Quebec and Canada sports. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders.
And members. First, for those participating by video conference on Zoom, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. The clerk and I will manage speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Colleagues, I'd like to now welcome our witnesses for the first hour today. We have from Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority, Ms. Larissa Fenn, Vice President, Corporate Affairs. Welcome to you. From the Nanaimo Port Authority, we have Ian Marr, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. Welcome to you. And from the Quebec Port Authority, we have Olga Fairman, Chief Executive Officer by video conference as well. Welcome to you. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We'll begin with our opening remarks, and for that, I will turn the floor over to you, Ms. Fenn. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, bonjour, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Je vous remercie de me donner l'opportunité.
I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Essential question this committee is pursuing. How do we, as Canadians, do more than simply protect what we have? How do we build something more resilient, more diversified, more ambitious? HOPA Ports operates a port network on the Great Lakes. So with your indulgence, that's where I will be focusing my remarks today. HOPA operates ports and marine facilities in Hamilton, Oshawa, Niagara, and coming soon, a public port in Sault Ste. Marie, where we're building, in partnership with the City of Sault Ste. Marie, a corridor that connects Northern Ontario's minerals and forest products with steel processors and manufacturers in Ontario's south and with overseas markets beyond. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence system is Canada's industrial heartland, home of steelmakers, grain farmers, miners of critical minerals, energy producers, and manufacturers of products shipped around the world. This region is at the heart of our shared mission to increase and diversify our trade. But the catch is, if we're successful in our trade diversification goals, we don't actually have the port capacity we need to make it work. We believe port authorities are uniquely positioned to help Canada meet this moment, but ambition requires capacity, and capacity requires a systems approach. And so with that context, let me turn to some specific actions this committee may consider in its work. The first of these is treating the capacity as a national systems issue. In addition to coastal gateways, Canada needs inland and regional capacity that relieves pressure on those gateways and moves goods closer to where they are produced and consumed. Better corridor integration creates efficient flows of raw and semi-processed materials, reduces long-haul trucking, and builds the sovereign supply chains Canada is now urgently seeking. Secondly, investing in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence network. The ports and marine facilities in this system already serve Canada's industrial heartland. With a systems approach to investment, they can drive our Canada Strong goals for domestic supply chains, for export growth, and for Canada's industrial capacity and competitiveness. The good news is it's not all brand new infrastructure. It builds on a seaway that's already in place and has capacity to spare in terms of the number of ships that can transit the system. Thirdly, ensure system enablers are in place. Extending the Great Lakes shipping season is critical. We know our colleagues at the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway are working on this, and enhanced icebreaking capacity will be necessary. We are pleased to see Canada rapidly investing in new icebreaking. Also, sustain the commitment to Great Lakes containerization. We were thrilled to see the recent federal budget recognized Hamilton alongside our colleagues in Quebec City as an emerging container-capable port. Hamilton is advancing an inland rail terminal as a first step, moving imports and exports of containers by rail, connecting the big market of the GTHA to ports like Quebec, Montreal, and Halifax. Our next step is to support marine container shipments, imports and exports, directly into the Great Lakes to provide system resilience and market flexibility. This is the kind of novel offering needed to build modernized and diversified trade relationships. Also, focus on Canada's reliability and competitiveness as a trading partner. Labor disruptions, congestion, system costs, and productivity challenges have had a cumulative impact on our reputation and our supply chains. These issues don't stay at ports and waterfronts. They impact productivity in manufacturing and agriculture and other sectors. These disruptions that we've seen in the past few years damage Canada's brand as a place to do business. The committee has an opportunity to signal that Canada is serious about being a dependable and competitive trading partner. And finally, governance flexibility. Canada's ports have a solid track record of financial self-sufficiency and stewardship of federal assets. To meet our ambitious goals as a country, port authorities can be better empowered as active instruments of Canadian trade policy, as well as responsible stewards of infrastructure. Current borrowing limits and the capitalization structure of subsidiaries is a good place to start looking at how to maximize port authorities' agility in the market. Again, we believe port authorities are in a unique position to be proactive instruments of an assertive national trade policy. We are ready to work with you to deliver on behalf of Canadians. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fenn. Next, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Marr. Mr. Marr, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the invitation to contribute to your study today. My name is Ian Marr. I'm the President and CEO for the Nanaimo Port Authority. The objective of supporting, diversifying, and modernizing Quebec and Canada's ports should consider the many touch points of ports, harbors, rail, road, and communities, and how every port can contribute to diversifying Canada's ability to find and support trade with new markets. There is a need to diversify and fully utilize Canada's current port properties and maximize individual capacities, creating a resilient, diverse system supported by short sea shipping, rail, or road. Major pressure on our current system with port backups, road and rail congestion, industrial land scarcity, climate events, and land uncertainty. Developing ports on the St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes, and the West Coast outside current heavily urbanized regions would significantly increase capacity for containerized and non-containerized cargo. Canada's objective of expanding trading markets requires consideration of where and how an infrastructure investment is made. Investment decisions should benefit exports, imports, and communities, not only at ports, but also along the internal trade routes I previously mentioned. Consideration should be given to the new trade patterns and provide complementarity within our port frameworks. If growth and diversification is the objective, we can no longer rely on the first to the line with the most money wins. When it comes to investment decisions, the government should establish the capabilities, possibilities, and strength within its port system to build required infrastructure and to create funding streams that allows it to meet the needs of new trading markets and a diversification strategy. Infrastructure funding should create capacity at different contact points along ocean, river, and road networks. Funding must consider the benefits of reducing congestion and overall environmental impact, whilst increasing capacity and throughput of the system. Ports require some regulatory and legislative changes to their current act, which has been largely unmodified for 27 years. Ports require flexibility through subsidiary capitalization review, allowing them to create partnerships that encourages third-party investment and releases the value of their balance sheets. Modernization of ports requires integration of existing technologies and developing new technologies to increase capacity and security of our ports and waterways. Modernization should flow across the entire transportation system, not in isolation of any single component, to ensure fluidity and increased value to Canadian industry and consumers. A key component of modernization integrates technology with education and development of the workforce. Labor must be engaged to achieve mutual long-term goals to maintain employment benefits in port regions and increase reliability in our national port system. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marr, for your opening remarks. Madame Farman, la parole est à vous pour une déclaration de 5 minutes.
Ms. Farman, you have 5 minutes.
Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Good morning. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues from the ports of Hamilton and Nanaimo, whose comments accurately reflect the issues we're facing in Quebec City. The purpose of your work today is directly related to Canada's competitiveness and the goal of doubling exports in 10 years. To achieve this, one essential condition must be met: the reliability of our existing infrastructure. Without it, there can be no predictability, no growth, and no sustainable diversification. In my year as the head of the Port of Quebec, I have come to appreciate the importance of the public infrastructure we manage in serving the Canadian economy and supply chain. Modernizing means not only maintaining a public asset, but protecting a lever of competitiveness and economic sovereignty. The Port of Quebec is the oldest port in the country and an essential link in the St. Lawrence corridor. We handle 28 million tons of cargo per year, worth $15 billion. We welcome nearly 1,000 ships and support 12,000 jobs. As the last deepwater port on the St. Lawrence, our direct connection to the heart of the continent allows us to accommodate large ships and offer economies of scale that translate into lower costs for businesses and ultimately greater affordability for Canadians. In 2025, our revenues exceeded $70 million, making us the fourth largest port in the country. But this performance relies on docks, nearly half of which will be over 100 years old by 2040. Last January, we had a stark reminder of this. 60 meters of our Pier 25 collapsed. No one was injured. The area was closed. But the incident illustrates what happens when century-old infrastructure reaches the end of its life. Above all, it reminds us of what lies ahead if we delay action: loss of capacity, additional costs, and increased vulnerability of supply chains. In November 2025, we launched the largest investment plan in our history, estimated at $1.7 billion over 10 years to rebuild critical infrastructure. Our goal was clear: to secure our assets, strengthen resilience, and position ourselves for the future. To carry out the first phase of this plan over the next 4 years, we are requesting a federal contribution of $340 to $380 million, approximately half of the cost. This plan is supported by municipal, provincial, and regional governments, as well as Minister Lightbound. $220 million in private investment has already been confirmed for the first phase. The benefits over 10 years are significant: nearly $1.8 billion in Canadian GDP and $1.1 billion in tax revenues. This project protects our port capacity and creates tangible economic value for the country. The benefits are consistent with the logic of St. Lawrence corridor, where each port plays a complementary role. Montreal opens, Quebec City consolidates, Trois-Rivières ensures fluidity, and Saguenay and Sept-Îles support strategic sectors. We cannot diversify our markets if the infrastructure is not resilient, and we cannot sustain growth without a certain amount of redundancy in the corridor. This complementarity, rooted in each region, is the strength of the network. The container terminal project led by QSL is based on this complementarity. Developed on existing facilities without encroaching on the river or dredging it, it adds capacity that the corridor needs and reduces logistic costs for eastern Quebec. This is not a project to shift volumes. It's a project that strengthens the entire corridor. The latest federal budget identifies Quebec City and Hamilton as ports for container exports, confirming this direction. Resilience is key and means reviewing our tools as well. Maintaining multi-generational public infrastructure has a real cost, and current mechanisms do not always reflect this. We must modernize the legislative framework for port authorities to prudently diversify our levers and align our government's model with the strategic scope of the assets we manage. The course is clear. If we want to truly diversify our markets and reduce our vulnerabilities in a highly unstable global economic and political environment, we must first ensure that our docks and facilities are able to withstand the test of time. They are the foundation allowing trade to operate and to flourish every day. And if we want to continue play this role for decades to come. We must modernize now while we still have control and before the port ends up at the bottom of the river like Pier 25. We have a coherent network, committed partners, a clear vision, and projects ready to go. We must now consolidate our achievements so the next 50 years live up to Canada's ambitions. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Farman.
I have for the benefit of our witnesses a yellow card and a red card. The yellow card means that you should wrap up, please. And the red card means that your time has expired and I will be passing the floor on to another member. With that, we'll start our line of questioning today with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses from, coast to coast. My questioning will mostly be for Ms. Fenn, just because as a proud MP from the Hamilton area, I've seen the success of HOPA on many levels, and you talked about Hamilton, Oshawa, Niagara, because it's the Great Lakes and not just Hamilton Port, and I'm encouraged to hear now, of course, Sault Ste. Marie, because, of course, the Great Lakes and St. Louis are Canada's fourth coast, which we always forget about. But yet it's billions of dollars in the Southern Ontario economy. And I know that in the budget there was an announcement finally of the CBSA facility, which is finally, after many years, going to happen. But despite that as a very simple and small ask, I'd suggest that HOPA has actually been successful in spite of the federal government, and here's why I think that. We had the National Supply Chain Task Force Summit back in 2022, which had, leading experts, really true leading experts from across the country. The final report of that Supply Chain Task Force came out, and it had 8 immediate recommendations, and 13 medium-term recommendations. Not all of those are done, and that's been some years. And then we, of course, had Bill C-33, which was the Strengthening Ports Bill, which was introduced in 2022 by the minister, now 5 times removed, and died on the order paper when the Prime Minister called the election in 2025. But, perhaps that's a good thing, because frankly, the bill was woefully inadequate, and I know we've had some discussions on that at this committee. And what preceded that bill was 7 years of consultation. And as well, this committee did a study on port infrastructure, and we visited ports from coast to coast and tabled a report. In fact, we were in Hamilton to see the great works there. So, there's been at least 5 years of talk and good intentions, but nothing to show for it. And so I'd ask, is it fair to say that there's been a lot of talk and really no action?
Thank you, MP Muse. We certainly have not, at the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority, have not been waiting to act in terms of growing our relationships with business, growing the impact that we can have on the economy, and growing our port network. And that's one of those things, I think, that came up through the course of those many consultations. And we think that there is probably work that can be done in partnership with government. But in the meantime, we have really found that the ability to go to reach into new communities throughout the Great Lakes Seaway in Niagara. We have been working with private sector partners to undertake new models of managing working waterfronts in Port Colborne and in Thorold, for example, and looked at other ways where we can bring into our portfolio lands that might be surplus within the federal portfolio. So we have been working forward in partnership with Transport Canada on that. But we really see the work that HOPA has done as sort of proof positive of the positive impact that port authorities can make. Our infrastructure investments yield usually a 4-to-1 impact in terms of their ability to attract private sector investment, and we see that's one of the ways that port authorities can really not just strengthen the supply chains, but also the communities where we do business. And we also see the impact of integrating port assets around the Great Lakes. Our partnership with Oshawa is a really great example. Yeah.
This point.
Yeah.
Because certainly you talked about a lot of the actions in your opening statement, and frankly, all those actions have been talked about for years. And so, I would suggest the time for talk is over. We need results, and our economy depends on it, as you've pointed out. And so, let me refer to a point made by the Association of Canadian Port Authorities, which Ian Hamilton, from your colleague, is a past chair of that organization. And they said that there is a need for streamlined project reviews to make major infrastructure happen more quickly. So from HOPA's perspective, our federal approval process is still slowing down port expansion or modernization projects.
Certainly, the faster that projects can be advanced, the faster they can be producing positive economic impacts for Canadians. I think it's particularly important at this moment when we are talking about potentially a $200 million investment in the Sault Ste. Marie in a new public port in the Sault, that's one of those places that an accelerated project approval and implementation timeline would be extremely helpful.
Let me get one last question in before we get the red card. So, again, these are great things that are happening, and that's because of HOPA's leadership, and it's because of your leadership and Ian Hamilton's leadership. But I don't think the federal government really has been a great contributor to that, and so I'd ask, from your perspective, has the federal government done anything really meaningful to help reduce the bottleneck that we're seeing at Canadian ports?
Well, certainly credit where it is due. We have worked with the National Trade Corridors Fund on a couple of occasions in the past, and as I mentioned, those dollars, the back in 2017, I think there was a $17 million investment through the National Trade Corridors Fund into base infrastructure. We matched that money. It is now, we are just on this spring going to announce the biggest sugar refinery in the country, $150 million investment in Hamilton. But the genesis of that was supported by a contribution from the National Trade Corridors Fund. I think being able to illustrate that and expand the impact of those kinds of things along throughout a bigger port network would be extremely helpful.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fenn. Our eyes lit up as you mentioned the opening of a sugar refinery. We very much appreciated that. Thank you very much. We'll turn the floor now to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
From sugar to me. Really appreciate all the witnesses here today. This is, again, an important study with regard to where we need to go as a country, as an economy. Prime Minister Carney has been very much focused on one gateway to diversify our economy, to strengthen our supply chains, and to be ambitious with our supply chains is around ports. And each of you talked about specific challenges that ports face every single day. Turnaround times, infrastructure capacity was another one. Adoption of modern technology, I think, was another one. So I'm curious, and we'll start with Ms. Finn, and then we'll go around the horn. What is the single? Like, if we were to triage this, they're all very important, and I totally understand that we have to focus on solutions from a systems-based approach. But I'm wondering if we can isolate what are the biggest barriers right now in terms of exceeding what ports can do, existing ports, secondary ports. How do we strengthen the supply chain, and how we grow the economy through ports? So maybe we could start with you, Ms. Finn.
Thank you for that question. Certainly, infrastructure investment is top of the list. If we want to modernize and enable ports to do what they are capable of doing. I think we all have infrastructure. There is a significant infrastructure deficit across the whole federal portfolio, and that is true for Hamilton as well. And we have also had challenges with the speed with which CBSA support has come forward. So making sure that the approvals of terminals are matched with the speed with which we want to set up trade capacity.
That's very helpful. Mr. Marr, can you chime in terms of some of the key structural barriers holding us back?
Yeah, I think for when I think about our board out here in Nanaimo, we look at the overall impact of what we do. We've had significant benefits from the Trade Corridor Fund and working in that capacity. But really the restrictions for us is the ability to get to our railhead and to be moving things through rail across the country. We've recently established our container terminal, $105 million project that took 5 years to get through the bureaucracy and get approved. And so that the value of that in that 5 years went from 105 million up to about 160 million, which definitely doesn't help development and partnerships with other parties. But in establishing short sea shipping, which we really believe is needed out on the West Coast, and we have further expansion available, we see that as being a definite hindrance in that you need to provide that access so that things can move easier across the Lower Mainland in particular.
Thank you. Ms. Farman, your thoughts on that?
Oui, merci pour votre question. Alors,
Thank you for a question. Beyond my colleagues, what my colleagues have confirmed, I think the trade diversification corridors announcement is essential for Quebec, and all of my colleagues. We need to rapidly get this program out so that we can rebuild assets.
For that question, I wanted to frame it as the challenges and now the solutions. Okay, so if we look at this budget that has yet to be passed, and there is some obstruction going on with respect to the budget and putting funds in place for the Arctic Sovereignty Fund and the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund, how key is this to moving forward? In a substantial way, because it was brought up here today that that these are mere concepts and we got to put things into practice. Okay, well, let's take that argument. Let's take moving concept to practice. The bottom line is that the way we move forward on making investments is passing $6 billion in funds for ports to allow them to do their thing. So I want to go into the future. If these funds are not passed, where do we find ourselves in terms of the things that you each want to do with your respective ports in your respective regions for this country to drive the economy forward, to have more jobs in place, to strengthen the supply chain? How, if we don't vote on this, or if we vote on it and it doesn't pass, what will that do in terms of your operations? And we'll start with Ms. Finn.
Thank you for that question. Certainly, we know that the country's ambitions to increase non-U.S. trade, to increase diversified overseas trade, are not possible without increased port capacity. We don't have the port capacity to, if we are successful, make those trade ambitions come true. At the local level, I think the need for infrastructure investment in Sault Ste. Marie, for example, is essential to activating a public port there that would employ 2,000 people in a community that's quite challenged at this moment. It means The issue around containerization in the Great Lakes remains unresolved, and there is essential maintenance work to be done throughout the network in Hamilton, in Oshawa, in Niagara, and elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a red card. Does that mean I have 10 seconds, or is that it? Oh, I thought I would try. Okay. Thank you very much. I would be interested maybe in written form. I'd be interested from the other two witnesses if they could maybe provide some thoughts to this committee on the last question that I asked in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kellaway. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to address Ms. Farman. Welcome to the committee, even if it's only virtually. My first question for you. You mentioned in your opening comments that some of your installations are more than 100 years and you need a $1.6 billion investment over 6 years. How have you reached that point? Was it a lack of availability of funds at the federal level, poor local management, or a combination of different factors? Could you please enlighten us? Answer. That's an excellent question. Clearly, all of the funds and revenues are dedicated, since it was founded, to reconstructing and maintaining the assets. So it's not a question of local governance. It's just that after all these years, the port has reached the end of its useful life. The ports are made of wood. You can well imagine that after 100 years, we have no choice but to rebuild this infrastructure, first of all, to face climate change challenges. And I should mention that the St. Lawrence is rising. We've also drawn out the useful life of this infrastructure, and we've reached a point where we truly have to rebuild this infrastructure. That's why we're making this ask to the federal government. Question. And what you've requested, you mentioned $380 million. Have you had an answer from the government so far? What we did last November was to present the entire 6-year project to the government. The federal government confirmed that we would need to reapply through the Canada Trade Diversification Corridors Fund. And what will be the consequences for the Port of Quebec if the federal government does not allocate these funds? This is a painful question. We'll have to close certain ports. I already mentioned that Port 25 has already fallen to the bottom of the river. That's what happens when a port reaches ends of its useful life. We would have weaker supply chains, be less competitive, and we believe that 25% of the port traffic could disappear in the next 25 years if an announcement of reconstruction isn't made this year. All right, thank you. I understand that this investment is very important. You say that 25% of what goes through the port could be threatened if there isn't this investment. Yes, absolutely. We serve various sectors, critical ones that are very commercially active. And without this new infrastructure, it would be a catastrophe for the Port of Quebec. So this is not an optional investment we're talking about. I'd like to address another point. You talked about your partner QSL a little earlier. Could you please tell the committee what exactly this project is with QSL? What is the Port of Quebec's role in this new project? Thank you for your question. For several years now, the Port of Quebec has felt that it had to become an international container port to give complementarity to its services. There is a Quebec company, QSL, based in Quebec City, and 2 years ago it came up to us with a container terminal project that would provide this complementarity. We're talking about $55 million for 250 50 containers every year. There are places already available. We wouldn't need to further encroach on the river. There would be no environmental impact then. There is no need for dredging. Currently, we're waiting for a designation for the Port of Quebec, as Hamilton has been designated. And once we're designated a container terminal project, then we could put this into effect. The question I have for you has to do with your relationship with the community. I understand that there have been past tensions between QSL and the union. There's also the question of air quality. What's happening right now on this front? Often people don't distinguish between a port and the operators. Is there a social acceptability in Quebec City? Are people ready to go ahead with this project? Thank you. Your question is timely. This is part of our strategic plan. Perhaps in the past, issues raised by the population weren't properly addressed. We are now systematically meeting the community. We are discussing the issues. We have a support plan for the various communities that will be affected. But we do distinguish between our port partners and ourselves. We've invited these port partners to come along with us when we address citizens. And we have a new initiative with the Mayor of Quebec. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brassou-Duval.
Yours, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Maher, I'm always delighted when our colleagues in Ottawa get to hear about the contributions that our West Coast can make to Canada's economy. And I really appreciate the thoughtful framework that you set out in your introduction around the need for an integrated network of infrastructure supporting the new trade patterns we hope to see in Canada, including, of course, short sea shipping from the Port of Nanaimo. I was also glad to see you elaborate in one of your earlier answers about the nature of that infrastructure, including access to railhead that would most help unlock that potential, including short sea shipping from our West Coast. Now, my colleague talked about the budget and the negative consequences of not passing it, and I actually want to ask the inverse question. I'd like to ask you what, in dollar terms, we need at the Port of Nanaimo from that budgetary pool to avoid those negative consequences and to realize the potential and the opportunity that we have at the Port of Nanaimo.
Thank you for your question. I think if I look at the positive aspect of the numbers we need to do that, we definitely have a long-term plan to develop, and we see the whole project like Vancouver Island. A million people almost on Vancouver Island. No commercial port per se. Everything moves by truck. So we're looking to establish rail back on the island that combines with the port activity and then moves it by short sea to Vancouver. We see a whole project there that, based on our initial assessments and our initial costings, is under $1 billion to reestablish rail and establish it on the Lower Mainland and provide that additional capacity of some 1.2 to 1.4 million TEUs a year on the island. We very much see ourselves as freeing up that capacity to allow Vancouver to better move exports out of the country.
Introduction, you talked about the ballooning costs that came from the delay in receiving the money for the last phase of the project, the $105 million allocation. How quickly do you need those funds to come through in order to avoid the same consequence for your future for the future plans?
For the future plans, I think what we would need is something to be happening within 2 years. I don't see it moving any faster than that by the time you put everything together, but you have to get orders out there and get those prices fixed. Otherwise, they will continue to grow in the marketplace.
So, especially in the context of recent job losses on the island from the closure of mills resulting from the trade situation with the United States that the government hasn't yet succeeded in addressing, can you talk about how your plans would help augment or mitigate some of the negative impacts that are coming from the government's inaction on the forestry file?
The obviously the construction would bring more jobs and more revenue into the communities that are affected as people move and find new jobs. The people that are in the forest industry are obviously skilled, labor and able to move around and be desiring to move around to make that happen. I think also on a long-term ongoing basis, as we build a new facility, there's additional employment there for the longshore labor and moving ahead, which I think is very important in our communities and has been there for a lot of years and is respected in the community.
Before I get red carded, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on how important it is to get government out of the way and make these projects move at as quickly as possible in order to realize the benefits.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and when we look back through the NTCF process where we got some funding for the last piece of infrastructure that we built, we've been very successful. We've gone above our weight, I would say, but we really it needs to move. It needs to be cohesive. There's multi-departments involved whenever you're doing anything in the water and around ports. And I think there needs to be that central processing facility that allows it to move quicker. And so you're just speaking to one person at one time that's going to make the decisions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marr. Thank you, Ms. Cronus. Next, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. I'll ask my question to Mr. Marr. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Also, welcome to my honorable colleague from Nanaimo. We have a veritable surplus of Vancouver Islanders on the committee this morning. It's wonderful, although Mr. Marr had the good sense to stay on the West Coast. So thank you for joining us, sir. I'd like to ask you to continue to sketch out this big picture vision for the Port of Nanaimo in the near and medium-term future. As you've already alluded to, we understand that Nanaimo plays a critical role not just for that community, but as the major port for Vancouver Island. But we also know that the West Coast ports in this country are absolutely critical to our trade diversification efforts, in particular opening new markets and access to the Asia-Pacific region. Could you give us a sketch, please, Mr. Marr, of how you see the Port of Nanaimo's role changing over the next decade beyond just moving more containers?
Yeah, we definitely see the role changing from where we traditionally have been with the forest industry and things like that. We've already adapted. We're now moving autos from our existing structure downtown in central Nanaimo that we repurposed. We've maintained those facilities similar to Quebec. They're 60 years old. They're made of wood, but we keep maintaining those, and we've created a good short sea shipping business with that auto industry. But what we're looking at in the long term is the container business on the island to move goods to and from across the country. We feel that when we look at it like, I guess you could call us an inland port on the ocean that allows the flexibility to move. We have more industrial land available. We're creating logistics parks. We're joining partnerships with our First Nations up and down the rail corridor that can create business opportunities there along that corridor for manufacturing and moving ahead. So the long-term vision is to complete that corridor from the south where you are to the north up Campbell River and out to Port Alberni to make that a wholly integrated system on the island that can move goods that need to be exported, but also move imports across the country.
Great. Well, let's stay on the topic of trade corridors for a moment. Mr. Marr, as you know, in Budget 2025, the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund is proposed to ensure that our transportation systems across the country can keep up with this desire to grow our exports. If you had the opportunity to leverage that fund to its full potential in the Port of Nanaimo, can you tell us what the single most transformative upgrade would be that you would prioritize to help transform Nanaimo from a regional gateway to a larger scale international shipping hub?
The largest one would be the further extension of our dock facility that allows two large vessels to dock at the facility. These are we have open water access. We have deep water so that it's easy to get for ships to get in and out. There's no delay times would be reduced, and the fact that we can take the large ships, although most of them are only going to be in the 12,000 TEU basis. We can take larger than that just with our depths alongside. So that would be the most important investment, which would be about $300 million. I would, based on our estimates at this time, that would start the additional investment in logistics parks and things like that, moving up and down the island and over to the mainland, partnering with our port operators, DP World, to do that. And I think we're very similar to I would say Quebec in that we're very structured in the same way, and that is a key movement of containers from the congested urban area that I mentioned earlier. We need to do that, and we need to look at that, before we make these monetary decisions and just hand out money.
Okay. So in my last couple of seconds, Mr. Marr, so your top priority would be expanding the size of your docking facility, but is it fair to say that doing so and thus having larger vessels docking in Nanaimo would further increase the strain on the rail infrastructure and the road infrastructure that you've already noted, and would therefore kind of lead to the need to invest in that capacity as well on the other side of expanding the size of your docking berths?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that needs to be looked at and how we do that. Does it have to be at the same points, similar to where we're landing containers and moving containers? Does it have to be at the same points as existing rail? No, it doesn't. I think it can be moved to other places more beneficial on the river, actually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greaves, and thank you, Mr. Marr. Monsieur Barcel-Duval, vous avez la parole, 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcel-Duval, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. As I noted with Ms. Farman, we began to discuss the new QSL container terminal project. For the time being, on the East Coast, there are container terminals where there is currently customs. For example, in Montreal, Halifax, Quebec City does not have this service. How necessary is it for the Port of Quebec, and what commitment have you received from the federal government with regard to a customs station at the port? I'll start by answering the second question. In the federal government, it was clearly stated that the government wants to designate both Hamilton and Quebec City container terminal ports. We'll be waiting in the next few weeks to receive this designation. As for your first question, you are right. Certain ports already have received a designation and work very well. We are targeting the area from Quebec City and to the east. It would be a complementary solution for multimodal transportation. You're referring to the fact that you have greater sea depth compared to further up the St. Lawrence. With regard to the Contrecoeur expansion project in Montreal, how does your project play with that, come into play with that. Our project would be entirely complementary. The idea is to offer transport corridors that make the St. Lawrence even more competitive and interesting. I don't have much more time, but I'm wondering about environmental assessments for QSL. As soon as the process gets underway, we'd need to have the international port designation before we could receive the report.
Sir.
Thank you. And my questions will be for you, Ms. Farman. I apologize, my French is not nearly as good as Xavier's, so I'll be speaking English there. So I just wanted to give you first an opportunity just to brag a little bit about the Port of Quebec. What type of impact does the Port of Quebec have on the GDP, if you know the numbers? And also maybe talk a little bit about the fact it is the deep water port, the most along the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Thanks so much for your question, and I'm sure your French is fantastic.
It's really not.
Alors, écoutez, je vais commencer par parler des collègues sur le
I'll just first start by talking about colleagues along the St. Lawrence. We are talking specifically about Port of Quebec here today, but whether it's Saguenay, Trois-Rivières, or Sept-Îles ports, as well as various provincial partners, we all make up an ecosystem, one that offers complementarity. And I've mentioned this word since we began our meeting. We serve Quebec, but we also serve the Great Lakes region. The Quebec port is the fourth most important when it comes to revenue in Quebec, $2 billion annually, and 2 billion tons a year. We are also the top destination for cruises on the St. Lawrence.
Thank you very much. Now, I've actually had the opportunity to see some of the pictures of the wharfs and the piers, and it honestly was shocking to me. It looked like something that was built by Jacques Cartier many years ago. And we currently had one, I believe it's Wharf 60. There's also the threat of 104 and 106 could fall into the water. I think nearly everyone agrees that we need to update those, but including the government, I think. But by them delaying, how much is that hurting? Like, if you'd had that $380 million 2 or 3 years ago, how much further could you be along right now?
Écoutez,
I'm looking toward the future. This money is absolutely essential for us to begin reconstruction. We've already launched the tender for bids. We need that money from the federal government. We'll also have an investment from the provincial government. And then there's the $220 million of private investment, which is conditional on the federal government's financing.
Point, I would just like to not to debate, but to give notice of the following motion. My apologies, this will just take a minute. That the Minister of Transport, along with the officials from the department, be invited to appear on the supplementary estimates 2025 to 2026 for 2 hours, and that this meeting take place at least 5 calendar days before the supplementary estimates are to be reported to the House. Thank you for your excellent testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Merci encore une fois, Madame Farman.
Thanks
And
once
then
again, Ms. Farman.
We'll turn the floor over to Ms. Wien. Ms. Wien, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's nice to see everyone today. Thank you very much to our witnesses who are joining us both online and here today. My first question comes out of the testimony of Mr. Marr, who noted the need for whole systems thinking, and so not just the maritime pieces, but also the rail corridor, et cetera. I would love to hear what your reflections are on like the best role, the best place for federal government around leading that work in collaboration with our partners here. and I invite each witness to just share a couple minutes on that before I do my next round.
So I'll open up on that. Thank you very much. You're talking about the best place to amalgamate that thought process and things like that. So I think with the National Supply Chain Office has obviously started that work and gone through some of that stuff and understands everybody in the marketplace. So I don't see, I would see building on that and give, maybe you have to look at a different mandate for that as well. But I really think, we got to get to the bigger thing as to how we make a better system and not just fix a bridge here and a railhead there or whatever.
Because we are operating a port network, we certainly view all of our ports as multimodal hubs, and we know from our customers that they are looking, when they come to locate their business at the port, to be able to use the right mode of transportation at the right time. And so the ability for port authorities to invest across the modes of transportation is really essential. It's what our customers expect, and I think that ports are really useful instruments of federal public policy in making sure that we are meeting customer needs at that really granular community level.
Madame Farman, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
Would you like to add something, Ms. Farman? Yes, I'll say that modernizing the legal framework is necessary, and then we need to activate the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund as quickly as possible.
In terms of sort of regulatory or operational changes, what would be most useful and advantageous in order to attract new global shippers and reduce the reliance on American gateways for both imports and exports as we think about the kind of big system picture? Larissa, do you want to start?
Well, we've already talked a little bit about the speed with which CBSA approval for new container facilities and other cargo facilities needs to move at the same pace that the other government departments are moving, and so that is really important. It's been important to us, and the ability to activate the infrastructure funding, make sure that that funding is rolled out with the system in mind, and so the where those investments are happening are complementary to one another, and making sure that we are able to talk to the government and give our thoughts in a fluid way. I think we can really help move things forward quickly.
Ms. Farman, do you want to add anything to that?
Alors, absolument, le plus rapidement possible.
Yes. Confirming the designation for complementary ports for the entire trade corridor as quickly as possible, and that would help us for the next 50 years.
Any last comments on this one? Okay, great.
No further comments. I think that.
Thanks, I'm good.
So thank you all very much. I want to thank all the witnesses who appeared before us today for your testimony on this very important study. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a couple of minutes to allow for the clerk to set up for our next round of witnesses, including the Minister of Transport. This meeting is suspended to the call of the chair. This meeting back to order. Colleagues, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, December 11th, 2025, the committee commences its study of improving Via Rail security and customer service and resumes its study of supporting, diversifying, and modernizing Quebec and Canada's ports. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Appearing before us today, we have the Honourable Stephen McKinnon, Minister of Transport. Welcome to you, Minister. And from the Department of Transport, we have Mr. Arun Tangaraj, Deputy Minister. Welcome to you. Mr. Serge Benjamin, Assistant Deputy Minister Policy. Welcome. And Stephen Scott, Director General, Rail Safety and Security. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for appearing before us today. We'll get right into it, Minister, and for that, I'll turn the floor over to you for your 5-minute opening remarks.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et bonjour aux membres du comité.
Thank you very much, Chair, and hello to committee members. Thank you for inviting me to speak about Via Rail issues that affect passengers, as well as the future of Canadian ports, a subject central to our national economic success, our security, and our sovereignty. Canadians increasingly recognize that our quality of life and our economic security depend on transportation that is efficient, reliable, and affordable. We have all seen how vulnerable it can be. In recent years, we have seen how weather events, labor disruptions, or approval delays directly affect Canadians, whether via rail passengers or the marine supply chains essential to Canada's economic prosperity. I want to be clear. Via Rail must do better. This service is essential for connecting communities across Canada, and as Minister of Transport, it is my top priority to ensure that all Canadians remain safe in our transportation networks.
4, the government instructed Via Rail to update its emergency management action plan within 30 days and to provide an independent third-party report investigating the event and Via Rail's response. After Transport Canada completed its own review, we made it clear that Via Rail needs to strengthen staff training, address equipment failures, and keep passengers' well-being at the forefront during any service disruption. In response to the government and the recommendations of the independent investigation, Via Rail updated its response protocols and staff training, introduced new measures to improve communications with passengers, and established a new reporting procedure to involve Transport Canada officials sooner when major disruptions occur. Through Budget 2024 and 2025, we provided funding for Via Rail to replace its aging fleet and implement technologies that will improve on-time performance. When our transportation system works, businesses increase productivity, our provinces are better connected, and Canadians are better off. This is especially true for Canada's ports, which are no longer important only for our economy or our supply chains, but also for strategic leverage in a world that is increasingly fragmented, volatile, and unpredictable. The Prime Minister has been clear in identifying rising tariffs and protectionism as a rupture. This is the time for Canada to become more resilient, more flexible, and better positioned to seize global opportunities. We must strengthen our strategic trade corridors and invest in state-of-the-art infrastructure to modernize our ports, keep Canada competitive and reduce our reliance on the United States. There is no question that our ports are strategic gateways that will help us double our exports to markets beyond the United States. Today, our maritime sector is a powerhouse of economic activity, with Canada's ports and marine shipping carrying nearly $140 billion in exports and more than $180 billion in imported goods for Canadians. In 2024, over 360 million tons of cargo moved through these strategic ports. However, they lag in modernization and automation and rank among the least efficient in the industrialized world for containerized cargo. This must change. That is why our focus is on modernizing Canada's strategic ports, helping Canada Port Authorities access private sector investment, increasing resilience to risk, and pursuing the highest environmental and safety standards. We are investing $5 billion in our Trade Diversification Corridors Fund to develop the infrastructure needed to move Canadian products to diversified markets, strengthen supply chains, and open new export opportunities. In addition, our $1 billion Arctic Infrastructure Fund will support additional transportation projects in the north to increase our Arctic presence and sovereignty, improve connectivity between Arctic and northern communities, and enhance Canada's emergency response capacity. These efforts will ensure that our ports and the Canadians who rely on them are positioned for success in a rapidly changing world. Recognizing the need to be ambitious and to build at a speed and a scale not seen in generations, we also passed the Building Canada Act and established the Major Projects Office to streamline federal regulatory approvals and create a framework for faster project delivery. Mon ministère dirige actuellement plusieurs grands projets d'infrastructure de
My department is currently leading several major transportation infrastructure projects that are already benefiting from this new approach, including the expansion of the container terminal in Quebec, a major project. Supported by up to $150 million from the National Trade Corridors Fund, this terminal expansion will increase the Port of Montreal's capacity by nearly 60%, create thousands of jobs, and inject $140 million into the economy each year. With generational investments, bold policies, and a clear commitment to trade diversification and Arctic sovereignty, we can build a safer, more competitive, and more prosperous Canada. Thank you, Chair. I am ready to take your questions. Thank you, Minister.
Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Honourable Minister, and your assistants here today, Deputy Minister. Good to see all of you. Thank you for your work on behalf of our great country. Minister, Parliament treated Bill C-5 like an emergency, so we passed it in essentially 10 days last June, and you and your government told us that national interest projects just couldn't wait. Yet, 8 months after Royal Assent, the Schedule 1 list of designated projects, the entire engine of the Act, is still at zero. So, Minister, you've already referred to 2 full tranches of projects to the Major Projects Office in your comments, including the Montreal Contrecoeur Terminal. Why has not a single one been formally designated? When will you stop referring projects and actually sign the first conditions document so shovels can hit the ground?
Well, the Bill C-5, of course, created the Major Projects Office. And I have the privilege of working closely on transport and other projects with that office. I can tell you that the project pipeline, Canadians should know, that the project pipeline is chock-a-block, is full of projects that are transformative in terms of our energy superpower aspirations, in terms of our logistics and port and other transportation priorities. And these projects are progressing, in my view, extremely quickly through the system. A number of strategies and projects have been referred to that office. Ms. Farrell has assembled a very impressive team around her to be able to quickly assess these projects. When we encounter obstacles, their job, my job, the government's job is to respond quickly to those, and our aspiration is to get big things done more quickly than ever. And the Major Projects Office is instrumental in getting us there.
It's very important, Minister, to get big things done. We just heard from Nanaimo Port that they said it took 5 years of regulatory red tape, and it cost an escalation of a $105 million project to $160 million. That makes it less affordable, and it makes it more difficult to expand trade. Minister, in Calgary last week, you mentioned that Canada has slipped on reliability. As a former Minister of Labour, you know better than anyone that voluntary protocols and interim orders do not provide the stability that our supply chain needs. So given your background, what is your specific solution to end the cycle of port disruptions while respecting collective bargaining?
That's an extremely good question, and I thank you for that. It's something that we're working on presently. It is true that Canada, to refer to the first part of your observations, Mr. Albus, it is true that we've taken too long to approve projects. We're changing that. It is also true that reliability around the Canada Labour Code and labour disputes in Canada is something where Canada has suffered. You can literally see when a labour dispute happens or is even threatened, marine traffic turn around on the ocean, head to another port, and never come back. So Canada must urgently solve this in the interest of workers and in the interest of our nation's supply chain security and prosperity. So we are going to be consulting with labour, with owners, operators, in our supply chains to ensure that we get to a better process, a more predictable process. Neither unions nor employers like this late-stage bargaining, this 11th hour pressure. It disrupts families. It disrupts other unionized environments across the country. I made the observation when I was labor minister, and will make it again, that hundreds of thousands of union jobs across the country are at risk, including in my own riding at a newsprint mill, when labor disruptions are threatened or actually executed. We want to bring more order and predictability to that process.
Predictability would be helpful, including regulatory predictability, and not designating anything under C5, I think, is a legitimate criticism, as is whether or not you're going to be fixing, while respecting collective bargaining, the cycle of port disruptions. Now, you say that you want more diversified trade, but Anchorage is literally the Wild West right now in places off the coast of BC, and will only get worse before someone gets hurt. When will you replace the voluntary 2018 Anchorage Protocol with a binding legislative framework for the BC coast?
Frankly, I'm more interested in how we turn ships around more quickly, so that we need less anchorage. I think the long-term solution to this is to have more efficient ports where boats have predictable berthing and are turned around, loaded, and off on their journey to foreign markets. The infrastructure that we have is not always favorable to that, and in Vancouver and in other ports around the country, we have to work on the investments that expand our capacity, but also, and one of the things, and I'm glad you referred to my Calgary speech, one of the things that I went on at great length about was the fact that we need to digitize our trade, make it paperless, make it easier for marine shippers, make it easier for our railways, make it easier for our port authorities to understand and measure travel times, berthing times, turnaround times, and understand where bottlenecks are in our logistics system. So we will be working very, very hard on that aspect of improving Canada's supply chains as well.
Minister, I appreciate the response, but I do think you need to look at Anchorage in addition to more efficient ports.
Happy to take note of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus, and thank you, Minister. Next, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Greaves. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, or, well, it's morning in British Columbia. Good afternoon, Minister. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you. As we've seen in recent months, and really since last spring, the Prime Minister has focused extensively on expanding Canada's relationships in the Asia-Pacific, which is critical to meeting the government's target of doubling our non-U.S. exports over the next decade. This will, I think by necessity, mean an increase in volumes and capacity at West Coast ports, notably in British Columbia. But as we heard this morning, some of the West Coast ports are already struggling with peak season congestion and capacity constraints. I'm wondering if you could please elaborate, Minister, on how the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund will be deployed to ensure that West Coast ports can handle the anticipated surge in Indo-Pacific volume without continuing this problem of bottlenecking that we're seeing.
Thank you very much, colleague MP Greaves, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to say just how much time, effort, and energy is currently being expended on getting our Pacific Gateway, getting it right. That will invariably require an expansion of capacity. But we're also mindful that we're asking a lot of the people in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland specifically to host this infrastructure. There's a lot of marine traffic, as you observe, and we're in the process of whether it be a small project like a debottlenecking or a large project like the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 expansion that we've been discussing for a long time. We're working hard on making that port of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority work and move a lot more efficiently for the people who live around it and for our nation's economy. The Trade Diversification Corridors Fund will be an important addition to our investment arsenal. There are other funding sources. Ports themselves have borrowing capabilities, but we will be working very, very hard on the West Coast to make our marine traffic move more efficiently and therefore have a more competitive export economy in Canada.
Thank you. Beg your pardon. Thank you for that, Minister. One of the things that we also hear from the leaders of different ports, but also others who work in this field, is the importance of the somewhat less glamorous behind-the-scenes infrastructure, which is critical to actually maintaining functioning port operations. Things like graving docks, mechanical facilities, and vessel repair hubs, which are really essential for a functioning marine economy. Would you please expand on how Budget 2025 and the work of your department might support the expansion of that behind-the-scenes infrastructure, so to speak, going forward?
Yes, thank you very much. And building on my previous answer, some of these projects, Contrecoeur in Montreal, Roberts Bank, these are very, they're headline-grabbing, major, visible investments that will make life better for Canadians and make our country more prosperous. But alongside those, and you mentioned graving docks, inland terminals, bottlenecks, rail bridges, spur lines, these are all smaller, perhaps more obscure, not as visible, but no less important investments. We have a lot of single points of failure in our logistics and supply chains in Canada, and we're looking to my previous answer, better be able to measure those so that we can address them more quickly, but make those investments in local communities that will help move goods more fluidly through our country, expanding east-west trade, and obviously giving greater and better access to port facilities on our coasts, and that in turn makes life better for the people who live near those ports.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to share the remainder of my time with my honourable colleague from Cape Breton who would like to ask a question as well.
Thank you, MP Greaves. Minister, I'm interested in your take on how ports can collaborate rather than compete when we're pursuing these international opportunities. You mentioned large-scale investment in ports as a necessity. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do we encourage or how do we focus and work with the private sector and the ports to encourage more collaboration regionally and nationally?
Canada is an ocean-going nation, and if we are going to expand our trade that is not destined for the United States, we're going to largely do it by transiting goods through ports. The fact is that our port capacity is insufficient today to meet that objective, and we don't have enough capacity such that we can afford to duplicate capacity. So we want to discourage ports from competing with each other in areas where perhaps we have too much capacity, and focus on those areas of great potential. And I would also say, because I know in Cape Breton, in your region, it's not just export activity at ports that is a major economic generator. It's things like ship repair and life cycle maintenance of some of our major ships, whether it be private ships, cruise ships, I know, which is Esquimalt is an important business sector, or Coast Guard ships. And these are important economic generators too, and we want to make sure ports are empowered and enabled to take up that work as well.
Thank you, Minister. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Vous la
We
parole.
now have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, to this committee. I hope that the Chair will indulge me and allow me to ask a question on something I gave a press conference on not so long ago. Given you're right here before me, I must ask this question. Travelers' rights associations are very upset that the 2023 Charter rights have not still yet been set up, nor has the model for airlines to reimburse passengers been set up either. Answer: we're currently looking at the system overall. Obviously, I want to reassure people, passengers, that they have and will have rights. We know that the system is complicated currently. It doesn't work well. If we look at the waiting list of passengers asking for their airline issues to be resolved, we're looking for solutions, and you, this committee, and the Parliament will be the first to know when we decide on an approach. So you understand that this is an issue, but there's no firm commitment for the time being. And if you'll allow me once again, Chair, you mentioned, rightly so, that the Port of Montreal and its Contrecoeur project, which will expand capacity for containers by 60% in the area, will really be a major significant project. However, when you look at the federal government's record so far, there are many issues that have not been resolved. For example, bank erosion, the riverbank erosion. The federal government abolished a riverbank protection program. And then there's the question of rail lines. We want the government, or the government has been asked to fund the reconfiguration or the removal of rail lines, or moving of rail lines, rather. And each time the federal government has said, we'll note that, we plan to act. There's currently total indifference in Ottawa with regard to the current Contrecoeur installations. And at the Contrecoeur site, the port is not asking for a permit, yet the site is contaminated. Do you think that the federal government's record with regard to issues in that riding is a good one?
Oui. Je vérifiais sur Verchères.
I'll ask about Verchères, and then I'll come back with regard to the dock. Contrecoeur, the project has been studied for years now. It's a major project and absolutely necessary for the Montreal port to expand. It will create jobs, economic activity. It holds possibilities for exports, and if we're aiming to carry out major projects that match our ambitions, we need to move. This project already has all permits except one, I believe, for building permits, rather. This project has been considerably debated, and at some point a decision had to be made. A decision has been made for Contrecoeur. As for environmental risks, my question wasn't specifically with regard to the environment, but rather that many demands have been made by my writing to the federal government. They've been ignored, and they have been mentioned in the committee reports sent to the government, in fact. My question that I have on behalf of my writing: if there's a 60% increase in the Port of Montreal, you're going to have a lot of containers. Citizens want to know, will their foundations crack? Will it take longer to get to work? Will I no longer be able to hear myself think? There are very concrete questions raised by constituents, and we still haven't received answers, or at least satisfactory answers. Questions raised in the past have not really been heard, we could say, by the federal government. How can we expect that these issues will be addressed in the future by Ottawa if they haven't been in the past? That's my actual question. it's not that we're not listening to what the constituents have to say. We're always sensitive to the needs of the community in a place where a major project is planned, and as we plan to carry out or put in place in Contrecoeur. I can tell you that this is a matter of modernization, that is using modern construction techniques. Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you've run out of time. You'll be able to ask questions and more questions.
Minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. McKinnon. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here, and I want to, because this is an issue that's, I've honestly, on Friday alone, I got 2 or 3 calls of people in tears. And that's with respect to the high-speed rail and the concern that it's causing in Eastern Ontario, and I assume as well in some of the rural areas of Quebec. They're really concerned out there, and I'm hoping we get some concrete answers as much as possible from you, Minister. So I'm just going to ask you some pretty concrete questions, and hopefully I'll get those answers. When will the final route be determined?
This year.
Thank you. When will expropriation begin, and when will property owners get notice of that?
The expropriation provisions, should they be adopted by Parliament, that land acquisition phase would begin almost immediately.
And what notice would they receive of expropriation, first right of refusals, or other limitations on their properties being registered?
What note?
What notice? How much time will they get in terms of from the time when they're told that their property is potentially expropriate to the time when they are having their property taken from them?
I'll get back to you on the exact time frames, but there will be lots of contact. We will have extensive maps published of the exact alignment, and people will on the ground will be on the ground to meet with property
Minister,
owners.
Excuse me, I have a point of order.
Just a point of order that we are here to talk about both Via Rail and ports, and while I am very excited about Alto, I know that the focus of today's conversation is on those pieces.
The Minister's happy to answer. I'd also say that one of the government's responses to Via's poor service is the creation of the Alto high-speed rail. So I think it completely fits in Foursquare.
Thank you for your point of order, Ms. Wien, and Mr. Lawrence. It's a valid point. In the framing of everyone's questions today, if we can just make it clear how this relates to what we're studying at hand, I think it would be helpful, and we'll avoid point of order. So, Minister, I'll turn the floor back over to you. And we stopped your time, so you'll have 3 minutes, 10 seconds left.
Thank you.
Okay.
My next question, Minister, is with respect to the crossing. So one of the other concerns I've heard from my residents is that, and people agree, it's a laudable goal to be able to get from Ottawa to Toronto in less than 2 hours. That's great. But their concerns are the fact that they are now going to have their communities bisected by this high-speed rail. Where now there will be students that will be separated from their classrooms, workers that will be separated from their offices, farmers separated from their fields, and patients, perhaps most troubling, separated from their hospitals. What guideline or restrictions are you putting on Alto in terms of how long between crossings?
So I want to sort of start at the beginning here and say that the first and most important thing is we're talking about a 60-meter maximum wide corridor. Maps have been published, obviously, to be able to study options on the entire alignment, right from Quebec City to Toronto. Consultations are happening as we speak to get community voices involved to deal exactly with the kind of thing, Mr. Lawrence, that you're discussing. It's just, we need a crossing here. We need a livestock accommodation here. We don't want to split this field in two. So it's exactly that kind of anecdotal and other data that Alto is looking for. We're obviously very well aware of the concerns, the kind that you're raising. I can't answer for every spot along the alignment of a 1,000+ kilometer linear project, but what I can say is that we will be very sensitive, and those who have those kinds of concerns or questions, I would direct them to the Alto consultation currently occurring so that their voices may be heard. And if you specifically have those who are expressing those things to you, send them to us, and we'll
I appreciate
we'll aim
that,
to get
Minister,
them
and
to
I don't mean
satisfaction.
I don't mean to interrupt here, but just specifically what my concerns, and quite frankly, right along Eastern Ontario, is that quite a few of the hospitals and other infrastructure are located around the 401 corridor. And people from north of where the projected line of, regardless of whether it was even just a meter, the fact that there's no crossing means instead of it taking you 20 minutes to get to hospital, it's now going to take you, it could be an hour or 2 hours. So we really do need information on that. Our residents do as soon as possible.
Both you and I are probably very eager to land on the final alignment. The reason why this phase that we're going through is important, and I understand that it raises concerns in some places, is to hear exactly those stories. Where access to hospitals, where access to fields, what agricultural operations is it important that we not affect, and so on. So this is why we
Just
have
one quick question.
This is why we have this process ongoing
before
now.
my time's up, sorry, Minister. But it's been reported that there's going to be financial analysis that you brought in consultants. Will you make that public, and will you commit today to sharing that?
With respect to high-speed rail? Well, look. This is a very transformative, ambitious project, and will require major investments on the part of the Government of Canada. This is a decision that will be made by Parliament, and so Parliament will have all the information that it requires in order to enable itself to make that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, and thank you, Minister McKinnon. Next, we'll turn the floor over to Ms. Wien. Ms. Wien, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Minister McKinnon. Thank you for joining us today at Transport Committee, one of the best committees in Parliament, I would argue. As Canadians and our government work to diversify our exports and reduce our dependence on U.S. trade infrastructure, can you tell me a little bit about how Transport Canada is prioritizing investments in Canadian-controlled gateways like East and West Coast ports, but also speaking to the St. Lawrence Seaway to ensure that exporters have resilient alternatives within our own jurisdiction?
So thank you for raising the St. Lawrence Seaway. You know, this is, as has been observed many times, a singular Canadian accomplishment, a major piece of infrastructure, and it is very much the spirit that animated the investment in the Seaway that we want to ignite and rely upon in the face of our current challenges with respect to the United States. The Seaway, unfortunately, is underutilized. It is not operating at capacity. I believe you heard from Hamilton, Oshawa, to cite but one, albeit very important, port in our Great Lakes system in the St. Lawrence. And we want to make it easier to get to and be able to rely upon service to those ports and expand the market share, if I can call it that, of the marine option with respect to moving goods, bulk materials, and so on into the heartland of Canada's economy, which is clustered around the Great Lakes. So this is a very important objective. We can take a lot of trucks off the 401 if we do that. It's an important objective in terms of developing those communities where we will be able to enhance port access. I think more generally, it's important that Canada utilize its strategic assets like the St. Lawrence Seaway to much greater effect.
Thank you. And I would love if you could speak to how the government is responding in terms of strengthening the resilience of our domestic supply chains, especially if we're thinking east-west as well as north-south, so that Canadian producers and companies are less vulnerable to external shocks that are beyond our control.
Yeah, look, so we have, Canada has, all governments, underinvested in our trade-enabling infrastructure and our supply chains. And let's all agree as members of Parliament, as politicians around this table, they're not always the perhaps most appealing. Monsieur Barcelo-Duval just said, illustrated why, communities in some cases have discomfort around hosting some of these assets. I talked about the Lower Mainland and British Columbia too, but we need to do it. Too many jobs, too many jobs in manufacturing and mining and energy are stymied because our supply chains and our transportation networks do not suffice. So we need to expand our supply chain infrastructure in big and small ways. We need to expand and improve the digitization and our ability to measure the performance of our supply chains. And we need, as Mr. Albus pointed out, we need better predictability in terms of labor relations in the sector broadly. These are important objectives that we will be pursuing, and objectives that I've been talking to all of the players to the extent that that's possible inside the transport sector and in our other economic sectors to make sure we have a network that's performing adequately for the very high ambitions we have for our economy.
Thanks. I want to ask a little bit around the role the federal government is playing in terms of supporting efforts to expand export handling capacity, through modernization of elevators, improved storage, more efficient scheduling. How can this help support, in particular, the Great Lakes Seaway, which both has benefits both Ontario and Quebec? So.
Well, look, I mean, every part of the this great land has unrealized economic potential, and the underpinning of economic potential is our ability to move goods, products from point of origin to markets elsewhere. Obviously, we want to increase trade within Canada. So we want a manufacturer in the Beauce to be able to export and move his products to Alberta and also to Europe. And in both cases, those require nimble, agile, modern, reliable, predictable supply chains. In terms of the Great Lakes, they do not have access as ports of first arrival in Canada. The budget spelled out the fact that we are looking at expanding that on a business case level to ports in the Great Lakes network. That will help communities, from Thunder Bay right up the St. Lawrence.
Thank you,
to meet their economic aspirations as well.
Thank you, Minister McKinnon, and thank you, Ms. Wien. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Let's continue what we were discussing before. I don't know if you know my riding. It's 50 kilometers long, and it's crisscrossed by rail lines. So we also have the Highway 30. So anything that happens to rail, sea, or road transport affects us. The Contrecoeur project cannot not impact us. We're asking people to sacrifice part of their quality of living. Yet there have been requests from the riding for years to the federal government with regard to the Verchères Port, Boucherville, the riverbank protection. And for the time being, we still have not had any responses from Ottawa. What we're seeing is that instead of solving these problems, you're going to add problems. Could there please be commitments to solve problems before more are created? Mr. Barcelou-Duval, we can go visit your riding together if you like. I'd be happy to analyze these various problems one by one. Some of them are likely municipal in nature, others provincial. If they are linked to Transport Canada, I'd be happy to go over them with you. There's not one in particular that you're confident to be able to solve then. Perhaps a clear example of what I mean is that there was no consultation in Boucherville or in Varennes with regard to the project. All these how is it that there's no plan? How is it that people are not informed with regard to rail lines in the sector? These are things people would like to know about. They want transparency and perhaps some sort of mechanism to prevent inconveniences to the constituents. It's the Port of Montreal that's in charge of the project. I think that you and I together can make this request on behalf of residents with regard to these issues. There's also the rail lines. There could be a coordinated action. I think it's entirely reasonable to communicate concerns about something that may impact day-to-day life in your riding.
Mr. Bassel-Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Bassel-Duval.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister and department officials for being here. Part of the mandate of this meeting, of course, was to talk about via delays, and so I want to make sure we give a little bit of love to that because
I was wondering
we
when that
haven't
was
done
gonna
that
come
yet.
up,
Well, exactly. So, look, I was on this committee back in January of 2023 when we had severe weather events across the country, and we had an emergency meeting of this committee at that time. And we had the then president of VIA here, and we were shocked to learn that the minister of the day, now that's 5 ministers ago, was not in contact during that moment of national crisis where people were in an egregious situation, stuck on a train for quite a length of time, and there were many issues around that. Now I have faith that would not be the case with you, Mr. Minister. But we did, of course, as you referenced in your opening statement, have additional delays and incidences in 2024. So it's apparent, and it was apparent during those meetings that we had at this committee that a lot of the lessons from 2023 were not learned, and changes were not made in 2024. And I think that still a lot of doubt remains in terms of delays of trains. We hear that constantly on in the corridor, and while high-speed rail is probably many years off, I think the timeline is ambitious. So what specifically are you going to do to ensure that this is actually addressed, and that those changes are made and publicly reported back to Parliament so we can measure that there's actually been an improvement?
Yeah, look, Via Rail is an important service, and let's agree that the service has not been as customer-friendly, reliable, or as punctual in recent years as it's needed to be. Now, let's also agree, I hope, that we live in a northern country with, sometimes unpredictable weather. We also live with a situation where along many segments of the so-called corridor, Via shares tracks and in fact does not have priority over those tracks with a railway. And so we, within those constraints, because we certainly want Via and CN to collaborate to the extent that is possible and make that situation better. But I've made, in no uncertain terms, my expectation clear to the new senior management at Via Rail that this must improve, that customer service, communication with customers must improve, that reliability of service, people want to know that trains are going to depart on time and arrive on time. And everyone understands, you do, I do, Canadians understand that storms happen and freak incidents occur. But beyond that, the things that are controllable, I expect Via Rail to control.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, because that's an important aspect of the ridership on those particular lines. And it isn't just during storms that there's been, fairly... delay is actually more constant than should be the case. Let me switch back to ports for a moment. Minister, the National Ports Association says that Canada needs greater agility, more flexible financial tools, and streamlined project reviews, and we heard that amplified this morning by the Hamilton Offshore Port Authority, Nanaimo, and Quebec City, amongst others. There was Bill C-33, which, again, 5 ministers ago, was woefully inadequate in terms of addressing some of those particular issues. That died, of course, when the Prime Minister called the election last year. So the industry is still asking for these particular issues to be addressed. So what reforms are you planning to implement so they'll actually get done?
All of them.
Excellent. When can we look forward to seeing those? Soon. Okay. Can you be more specific than that?
These are very extremely active deliberations that are ongoing right now.
Okay, I would note that a representative of the Hamilton Offshore Port Authority is in the row back there listening, and I'm sure that she, as well as her organization and port authorities across the country, will be making sure that you follow through on that commitment. If I could sneak in one last question. I asked the president of Alto at Finance Committee last week about the use of Canadian steel in the project. He committed to that. I had asked an order paper question in 2024 about federal project using Canadian steel, and the answer was we don't track that, which was shocking. So are you committed to making sure we use it, we track it, we report it back to Parliament, and that not just steel, but in all projects from the transport perspective?
One thing I think, I was surprised by, and I'm sure all Canadians would be, is that we don't make rail steel in this country, at least up until now, anymore. And Alto has launched a process with our steel producers to see what we can do about that. We have a Buy Canadian policy. Obviously, steel is an iconic, important, vital, essential part of that project. And we expect the provisions of the Buy Canadian policy to be respected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Minister. We'll end off today with Monsieur Lauzon. Monsieur Lauzon, la parole est à vous. Vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le
Mr.
Président.
Lauzon, you're the last to speak. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister McKinnon, for being here at your committee. Thanks for being here. Many witnesses have reminded us of the reliability that we need our supply chain to be, that there's the question of international competitiveness. This is so important for the country, and you mentioned this in your introductory remarks. You mentioned resilience. However, Ms. Farmand talked about the impact of going ahead with fast investments. She first talked about maintaining infrastructure, and then spoke about innovating with regard to feasibility, scale, and so on. What is your position with regard to maintaining assets currently in place? Is it necessary to make major investments in these facilities that in some cases are over 100 years old? My colleague from the Outaouais region and I understand how important it is to optimize the use of current infrastructure. When infrastructure is already available, such as the case of Port of Quebec, we obviously want to optimize its use. In the case of the Port of Quebec, the facilities are outdated and no longer sufficient for such an important port. You also heard me talk of the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is strategic infrastructure that is underutilized. It's much cheaper and faster, as well as optimal, to use infrastructure that we already have and to fully use it to create prosperity. Having said that, we know that our current facilities, even renovated, would not be enough to realize our economic goals. That's why infrastructure such as we need in Montreal is essential for the entire Canadian economy, just as it's essential on the Pacific Coast, in Vancouver, and elsewhere. We're looking first then at optimizing our current infrastructure. At the same time, we're moving forward with long-awaited projects to expand certain facilities, major facilities. Inaudible? Obviously, the funding questions are always complicated. It depends on how much we can borrow. Sometimes we need to enhance, contribute. This is the case in Montreal and also Quebec. There's obviously the infrastructure bank that can contribute as well as the private sector, but every project is done made to measure. That's right. Our $5 billion for the trade diversification corridors will be put in place quickly so that we can assess all projects nationally. Minister, it's important to adopt the budget as quickly as possible. We absolutely want to be able to act, to move forward as quickly as possible. The better, the faster, the better for Canadians, for jobs, for economy, and so on. We've had witnesses from Nanaimo, Hamilton, Quebec City. Often, small and medium enterprises across Canada depend on supply chains. We always talk about the major urban centers. Have you had the chance to visit Nanaimo? I believe you have, in Quebec City as well. Can you talk about the importance of the supply chain for rural regions, for small business? We want to keep them in place. Yes, let's talk about critical minerals, committees with sawmills. They need these services. In our region, I have a newsprint mill, and you have a white birch facility. They don't depend on rail lines or Class 1 rail lines, but rather on rail lines that link our region to Class 1 rail networks. If the service isn't reliable, if there is no predictability, these industries suffer. Newsprint can't be stored outdoors. The mill has to continue to produce, has to be able to continue to produce. So we want to have reliable services all along our rail networks and link together as many communities as possible. We won't always be doing so through rail links. That's why we also need to look at more intermodal terminals so that there's this link between sea transport, road transport, and rail transport as much as possible. These intermodal terminals actually drive economic activity, create jobs. That's why I'm so interested in developing these intermodal terminals. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon.
Including intermodal into our conversation today. I'm sure that our former colleague,
I'm surprised it took that long to get there, Mr. Chair.
On behalf of all members of this committee, I want to thank you, Minister, for your generous time today, as well as your department officials. With that, colleagues, the meeting is adjourned. Look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday.